Yeah, sure.
No, that's fair, Preston.
So whenever you're filming, I'll ask.
No, it's recording now.
Oh, it's recording.
But just to clarify, the brothers still setting up. So yeah, they're just talking like normal human beings, yeah. But Preston, before you do, like I said, with those type of questions, like I said, you read the Quran, alhamdulillah, and then if you've got any questions, ask them. Also, it's very good. But Hashim's always here to ask you any question that you do have, mashallah.
Yeah, inshallah.
He has some knowledge, I've heard.
We try. Okay, ready when you are?
Are you ready? Are you recording?
Yeah, okay.
So it just started with the Preston was asking. So he was reading the hadith and he got some very good answers from Brother Mansoor, mashallah, and he's happy with that thing. Is that right, Preston? Yes. And
yeah, if you got any other questions or any other
if you do have any more questions,
issues you want to discuss, yeah.
Because as I've learned, reading the hadiths is not enough. You have to read the Quran.
Yes.
But something just got mentioned, which is very interesting. Which version of the Quran?
Which version of Quran?
Yeah.
Actually, there's the Quran. When you say the Quran is always in Arabic. So maybe you want to ask which version of the translation.
So would I have to learn Arabic to learn?
Well, you don't have to learn Arabic, but it'll be good if you do learn Arabic. However, there are many translations available. So, you pick up a translation that you feel comfortable with, but I would rather advise you to ask around and ask Muslims which translation is good, because there are many good translations. Like the Sahih International, for example, is one of them.
Which one?
Sahih International.
Sahih International.
Yeah, and there is a few other translations which you can perhaps read. So, obviously, I don't expect you to learn Arabic and then try to understand the Quran, because obviously that's a long process.
But if I wanted to learn Arabic, would I do it from a religious perspective, or would I just go to someone who teaches Arabic? Because which version of Arabic?
Yeah, because you see, that's a very good question. The Arabic that normally the people speak is called the Ammiya, is the normal Arabic, which is a day-to-day Arabic language, whereas the Arabic of the Quran is the Fusha, which is more of the classical sense. So it's like, your everyday English and your Shakespearean English, to put it in perspective. Something like that, basically. So one is a more formal, more classical in its construct, like the Quranic Arabic is, and the other is a more general daily life kind of Arabic. So if you wanted to understand the Quran, you have to learn the classical Arabic to understand its terminology, its context, its basically the rhetoric within the language and the grammar and so on, which is kind of a steep curve, if you ask me. Yeah, so there's no shortcuts.
Right.
However, if you wanted to learn the message of the Quran, there are numerous translations available in English and in other languages too. So just pick a reliable translation and then you can understand. And the same applies with the hadith. The hadith are also in Arabic.
Yeah, the problem is I'm reading the English translations, which might not be authentic, because some people say that once it's translated from Arabic, that things get missed out. Translation.
Lost in translation, like they say, yes. And that applies to whether it's Greek or Arabic or Hebrew or whatever it is. Because at the end of the day, if you wanted to learn the original sources, it is always best to learn in the original language. However, that's not possible for everyone.
So just to confirm, to learn classic Arabic, if I wanted to read the Quran, I would have to go to a teacher who teaches classical Arabic.
Yes, of course.
Right,
yes. Like any other language.
Yeah.
That's I was just about to say, that would be down the line, obviously. Let's put it this way. The English translation, you're not getting a totally different understanding. It's not like as if it says you're walking in the park and that's not what it says in Arabic. It's just that if you learn Arabic, you would get a far greater, deeper meaning, you understand, of the Quran. So that's why, and it is always advised to learn Arabic to get a more deeper understanding of the Quran. However, does that mean that you're restricted to not being able to read the Quran?
No,
of course,
absolutely
you can read the Quran, and you would get a great understanding.
You'll get the message from the translation, and that's what most people around the world do. You see, today the Muslims who speak Arabic and who know Arabic are far fewer than the people who do not speak Arabic. So if you look at the Middle East basically is like where most of the Arab speakers are.
Yes.
It constitutes something like between 17 to 20% of the entire Muslim population. Yes, so which is actually a minority. Which is a minority, less than quarter of the entire Muslim population you're talking about. Most of the Muslims live outside the Middle East and they are non-Arabs. Yes? I mean, this is what you have to realize, that today the Quran is taught in most non-Arab countries, and most of these Muslim countries who are non-Arab, they memorize the Quran because Allah makes it easy to memorize and also to understand for people who make effort. So it's not like an impossible task just because your native language is not Arabic, because there are many Arabs who do not understand the classical language as well. It's not just the non-Arabs. So they also have to study formally. Yes, they have to. And this is the same with, I think, with all languages, because unless you study the actual language from from a teacher, from someone who's learned in that particular field, then only you will understand and grasp the full understanding of that particular language. So yeah, I mean, coming back to understanding of how you would approach, you know, the traditional way of learning the Quran and the Hadith wasn't basically to learn it from a book, yes, but you learn it through a teacher. So there's a one-to-one interaction, or maybe even a class where a teacher who's qualified teaches that particular topic.
And that would not be the Imam. The Imam is separate from the teacher.
So Imam is a more generic term. Basically, it can be someone who leads the prayers in the masjid, or it can be someone who teaches the Quran and Hadith as well. It depends, I mean, in what context you're talking about the Imam. Basically, a teacher is required if you want to understand the Quran and the Hadith. So some people do it today with the technology. I mean, they go to YouTube videos where there are certain teachers who teach through this medium, through the YouTubes or through Facebook or whatever social media that they choose to interact through. Because not everyone has the time to go to a particular class and learn.
But can that be done? Because I would be interested in going to a class where someone would actually talk.
Oh yes.
That can be done.
Yes.
What are those classes called? Is there a particular name, or is just
No, it could be. I mean, you approach, for example, you approach.
The Christians have their own, which they call their Bible classes.
Well,
the Muslims.
That's a generic term, isn't it? Bible classes. I mean, I can say there are Hadith classes and fiqh classes and Quran classes.
So what would they be called, so I know where to go to make sure I go to the right place?
Well, I think Islamic studies, or I don't know. I mean, maybe you talk about, like, for example, there are Quran classes, there are Hadith and fiqh classes. Fiqh is the jurisprudence within the Islamic basically field, and this is, like I said, there are so many things to learn. So if you're a beginner, you do not just aim for like the PhD level. You know what I mean? You start at the bottom, so you start from the basics, and then you gradually move up. And this is how everyone did in the past. So even during the Prophet's time, there used to be students who studied under him directly. So his companions, they would come to him and they would study directly from him. So the angel Gabriel, who brought the Quran to Prophet Muhammad, then he would memorize it, and then he would teach his companions. And the same thing with the Hadith. The Hadith are basically the sayings and the actions of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and also of the companions. And this is what happened. I think after a couple of 100 years, maybe 200 years, Bukhari and Muslim, when they collected the Hadith, yes, it was a meticulous process. The process wasn't just like, oh, I heard from this guy, I will write it down. They used to scrutinize the person they heard it from, and where did that person get it from, and that person, where did he get it from. And they would establish a chain of narration, which is called the sanad or the isnad. And this chain of narration is something which forms the science of hadith. So within the science of hadith, you have basically the chain of narration. You have something called basically the what it is. The ilm al-rijal, which is again each person within that chain of narration. You have to know about that person's integrity, as to whether he's someone reliable, someone, both his character and his memory, for example. So someone who might be like 80 years old and another companion who might be maybe much younger, so they might say something different. So who is given precedence and why? And this whole process is called the ulum al-hadith, or the science of hadith. Ulum means science. Yes, and we have the ulum al-Quran, so the science of the Quran. And the same way, it is a meticulous process. So for example, you must have heard of many Muslims who have memorized the Quran. Yes?
See them here.
Yes, there are many who have memorized here, and there are many children who have memorized the Quran. So I know children as young as 6, 7 years old who have memorized the Quran from cover to cover. Yes? And they can pinpoint mistakes an adult makes or a child makes quite easily, because they know it so well. And this is one of the ways of preservation of the Quran, through the oral tradition. And this again is being taught through a teacher. So every morning the students go to a masjid or an institute where they learn the Quran and they memorize the Quran with tajweed. So the way each letter is pronounced, they learn that.
And the classical Arabic way.
Yes, and they're not necessarily Arabs, like I said. So this is something, a phenomenon which you'll find within the Muslim societies all over the world. Whether it's Russia, whether it's America, whether it's Asia or Africa, it doesn't matter. You'll find this phenomenon everywhere. And each of this person who memorizes the Quran, and some of them learn the tajweed. Also, the tajweed is basically the correct way of pronouncing each and every letter and word within the Quran. So you know, the Arabic language is so subtle that if you mispronounce a word, it changes the meaning. Yes? So for example, for you as a non-Arab, the word kalb and qalb might seem similar, yes, but they mean completely different. One actually means a dog and the other means heart. Yes.
Depending on how you pronounce it.
Yes, because the word qaf, these are two different letters. So you got the qaf and the kaf. These are two different letters, which changes the meaning of the word fundamentally. So this is the actual letter difference I showed you. And there is then the difference of the diacritical marks, which is the fatha, kasra, dhamma, and so on. So these are the different diacritical marks, which again changes the meaning of the words in the way you pronounce. So that's the reason the tajweed is very important. How do you pronounce
T-A-J?
Yeah, T-A-J-W-E-E-D. Yeah. And this is what it is. It's basically every single teacher who's teaching the tajweed and teaching the memorization of the Quran, they have something called the ijazah, which is basically kind of a certificate of qualification for them to teach their students. And his teacher has an ijazah, has a certificate. So the teacher's teacher has a certificate, and the teacher's teacher's teacher has a certificate.
Do they have to go through like an examination to get the
Yes. So there is like, yes.
How do you pronounce it?
Ijazah.
I-J-A-Z-A.
Yes.
Ijazah.
And this permission or this certification, this accreditation is something that is, you'll find this throughout the history of Islam. And all of this ijazah, it basically links all the way to the Prophet ﷺ. So you see, we have a twofold way of preserving the Quran. One is through the oral tradition, which is what I told you about the memorizing. So the Prophet ﷺ got the revelation from Angel Gabriel. He taught his companions taught the Tabi'in, which is basically the next generation. And then they taught the Tabi'in, which is like the third generation. And so on, all the way till today. So it's not a dead...
when that was being done, when they were writing the Quran and they were...
No, this is just oral memorization I'm telling you about. So this is just the oral tradition.
Sorry.
Yes? So we have the written tradition as well, in addition to the oral tradition. And the oral tradition was always the prime way of propagating the Quran.
Really?
Yes.
So how long did it take before it then started being...
I think, no, it was written within
at the same time.
At the time of Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ would dictate to the scribes to write it down, like Zayd bin Thabit. He's one of the scribes. Yes? And there are many other scribes who were there with the Prophet ﷺ. I don't know if you heard of the Birmingham manuscript. This is a recent manuscript.
Birmingham manuscript?
Yes. It was recently discovered, I think about 2 years ago. So someone discovered it. Basically, it was in the Birmingham University for a long time, but no one basically came across it.
Where was it discovered?
Birmingham University. Here in UK, yes. I mean, obviously it came from Arabia, but then somebody brought it here. They just put it in a shelf somewhere, and then it was left there for a long time. And then someone decided to carbon date it. And they found after carbon dating that it was very close within the period of the Prophet ﷺ. So you're talking about like a decade or 2 decades at the most. That is how close the range is in terms of its dating. And this is a clear proof that the Quran survived all these 1400 centuries intact to this day because of this twofold method of preservation of both the oral tradition and the written tradition. And this is something no other religion can say that yes, we have got the same tradition of both the oral and the written. So if you ask a Christian, show us any manuscript from the 1st century. They can't, because they don't have any.
I mean, I can't argue for them. I don't
No,
know.
that's fair enough, yeah. Because I've asked many Christians, and many scholars The Christian scholars will tell you this, that they have no manuscript from the 1st century. So there are fragments from the 2nd century. Most of them date to the 3rd, 4th, and later centuries. So what do you see in the Bible today, for example, the red letter Bible and so on? These are not the literal words of Jesus. These are what people assume that Jesus must have said. But anyway, because you're not a Christian, I'm not going to use that as a as a topic. But just to show you,
it's called the Birmingham manuscript.
Yes, you can Google it. It was even actually on BBC when this was discovered. And that is not only the manuscript. We have other manuscripts from the 1st century. We got the Sinai manuscript, the Topkapi manuscript, and all these manuscripts, they have been carbon dated to the 1st century Al-Hijra. Al-Hijra meaning the time, the Islamic calendar. Yeah, so we have, our century doesn't start from like the Christian era, the 1st century. It starts from, like I said, it's been 1400 years now.
So what is the calendar called? Because they had the Gregorian calendar.
We got the lunar calendar.
You use the lunar calendar.
Yeah, it's called Al-Hijra.
Al-Hijra.
Yes. So the Hijra was when the Prophet ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina, and that is when the first the dating of the Islamic calendar started from. So we got the lunar calendar. That's the reason the Muslims, when they when they start their month, a new calendar month, it is based on the moon sighting, and this is when they start the new month. So we do not follow the solar calendar. We follow, I mean, the Muslims follow the lunar calendar in their religious observation.
I could be wrong here, but is that why at the top of the mosques they have a moon? Because they
No,
lunar calendar?
No, absolutely not. No. This is, so the moon, basically, you know, the Ottomans rule
Yes, I remember.
large portions of the Islamic world. And there, if you look at their flag, even today they have a crescent.
Yes.
So this was something that the Ottomans had started in terms of, as a symbol to show that this is our mosque, our region, because the churches used to have a cross, so from far off you can tell that this is a cross. Similarly, the Muslims, they basically started having a crescent, but it's not a requirement. If a mosque doesn't have a crescent, doesn't mean that's not the right mosque.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's just to symbolize as, I mean, the lunar calendar, again, it's because we follow the lunar calendar, so maybe the crescent can symbolize that this is something from something related in that terms as well. Yeah, so you could have a point there, yes, but it's nothing to do in terms of, we do not worship no moon god, because there are many Christians, unfortunately, and many non-Christians who would actually go about telling Muslims, you guys worship a moon god. No, we don't, because Allah says clearly in the Quran, yes, that do not worship the moon or the sun. So if we were worshipping the moon, why would the Quran tell us not to? It's absurd anyway. Because these are the creations of Allah. We do not worship any creation, be it man, be it an animate object, be it an animal, man, doesn't matter. Moon, sun, we don't worship none of that. We worship one who is the creator of all those things. And that is what we worship. So you see, Islam is very simple in terms of its its observance and its reverence and its worship. We worship none other than Allah. And this is very clear. It's a simple message, down to earth. And there were prophets, you know, there were prophets that we believe in, but we do not worship them. So Jesus is one of the mightiest messengers of God. We love him, we revere him as the Messiah, as a prophet of God, as one of the mightiest messengers of God, who came down and with the Injil. Again, this is a revelation of God. The Injil is not the Torah, not the New Testament. And Moses came with the Torah, and the Torah is not the Old Testament. Because many people have this misconception, and some of the Christians have started using the term Injil as if they're talking about the New Testament. No, the New Testament is not the Injil. The Injil is actually a singular form of the word gospel. So if the Christians say that they are following the Injil, which gospel? Is it the gospel of Mark, Matthew, Luke, or John? Because there are 4 gospels.
So wait, as a Muslim, when you read the Injil, where would you read it? It would not be in the Quran, or would it be separate?
We don't read the Injil.
Oh, you don't read
No, we don't read the Injil. The Injil was revealed to Jesus. And Jesus, or as the Muslims say, Isa alayhi salam, Isa, peace be upon him, he came specifically for the children of Israel, the Bani Israel. And these children of Israel, the Bani Israel, are what you call the Jews today. Well, most of them, I think, the Bani Israel. And there are many Jews who can be atheists, who can be other religions. So I'm talking about the Bani Israel, the ones who follow the message of Moses, yes, before Jesus came. So when Jesus came, they had to follow Jesus. However, many of them rejected Jesus.